Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is Believe.
Ich warte seit Wochen auf diesen Tag und tanz vor Freude über den Asphalt. Als wär's ein Rhythmus, als gäb's ein Lied, das mich immer weiter durch die Straßen zieht. Komm dir entgegen.
Hello and welcome to Gegenpressing, the Bundesliga podcast. This is the main show. This is the review show. I'm your host, Manuel Feeth. He is Stefan Bienkowski. And Stefan, boy, I think we both need to recover, not just from the football, but from our lives and weekend in general.
Yeah, it's been a busy weekend for both of us, hasn't it? We've both been travelling. It's just that busy time of the season, isn't it, I suppose, when and yeah, it feels like it's going to be another busy year, but it was good. The football was good, and there's a whole lot to talk about, I suppose, isn't there?
Yeah, we have a ton to talk about. I was going to say we can chit-chat here all we want, but honestly, we probably shouldn't because there's a ton of topics to cover. So let's jump right in after this break.
This episode of the Gegenpressing podcast is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline remains your number one source for all your sports betting this season. Everything from pro and college basketball to UFC, MMA, and more. You always find the latest odds, team matchup info, player news, and game trends at BetOnline. With live betting options, free contests, and live scores for almost any sport or game imaginable. BetOnline is truly the fastest and easiest way to bet all your favorite leagues and events. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to join and receive your 50% welcome bonus with your first deposit. Make sure to use the promo code BELIEVE, B-L-E-A-V, BELIEVE, to receive your rewards. BetOnline.ag, where the game starts.
So yeah, Stefan, I don't even know where we should start because honestly, like obviously there was the big match on Sunday. I think we should leave that to last. We're going to make listeners sit through this entire show before we get there. And I kind of got really briefly. We're not going to talk about this in great analysis, but I just thought this was so funny because we all saw this a mile away coming. It ended up being even worse than I thought. Gladbach beat Bayern, and then they just completely get smashed by Mainz. Like, it wasn't even close. It was 4-0 in the end, right? I mean, this is just... you can't make this up anymore at this point.
Yeah, I know. It's it was just one of those kind of bizarre results. I was actually kind of thinking over the course of the weekend, yeah, being a Gladbach fan right now must be so bizarre in the sense that you just do not know what to expect most weekends. And I guess most football fans kind of fall into that bracket, but it's just, I mean, I know we talk about this a lot. I don't know if we need to just coin a term for it called like the München deficit or something, or the Bayern deficit, and because people just seem to be so physically exhausted after whenever they manage to pull off a result against Bayern, and they always seem to lose. But it's not even just Bayern. Gladbach have been doing this all season. I wrote a piece I remember writing a piece back at the start of the season about how in their first 5 or 6 games looked great defensively, then that went off a cliff, and then Marcus Thuram wasn't playing well, then he was playing well, and then they've just been all over the place. And actually, we had Kev on the show last week, the transfer show for subscribers, and we kind of went into a lot of detail about just how chaotic that squad is right now and how much of a turnover there will be in the summer. So I don't feel like it's going to get any better for Gladbach anytime soon, but I guess that's kind of why we love the Premier League. I guess that's why we love the Bundesliga, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it is crazy. I think it's almost unexplainable at this point, and the amount of comments and mentions that I got on my Twitter feed afterwards. it's hilarious. At least we both saw it coming and tipped accordingly, although I don't think either one of us thought it would be this bad for Gladbach. Yeah, so the other game, of course, and we both guessed this right, Stefan, was the Leipzig against Frankfurt game. Frankfurt lose to Leipzig 2-1, and you kind of see a separation at the top now, right, with the contenders and the teams that are maybe not going to contend for the title. And I think Frankfurt are probably now too far away to call themselves a title contender. Leipzig are fully in it. And I want to talk about Leipzig in a moment here, but you almost get the sense now, Stefan, that Frankfurt, the best thing that can happen to them is to get kicked out of the Champions League by Napoli. And I mean, it looks like that, right? They're down 2-0 after 90 minutes. But I almost sense like for them, because of the way that they play and the high pressure game that they're playing, getting rid of one competition might actually be the best for them to sort of salvage their Bundesliga campaign.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I didn't get a chance to watch this game in full, but from what I have seen of it, it kind of unfortunately kind of confirmed my concerns that Frankfurt are beginning to kind of run out of steam a little bit. It seemed to me like a game in which Leipzig, just out of almost sheer will, were able to kind of overrun them. I mean, if anyone hasn't seen Timo Werner's goal for this game, it's really worth watching because it kind of sums up the poor guy quite well in the sense that he more or less kind of stumbles. He runs through on goal in the way that we all know Werner to do. He's playing on the last man, gets played through, and he basically falls over in the process of trying to finish the shot, and it just kind of bobbles inside the post, which, doesn't exactly help his reputation for being a little inaccurate in front of goal, and suggests that the only way he can score is by maybe mishitting it on the way of falling over. But no, I think it was a game that Leipzig kind of really dominated, and I think it probably did a really good job, as you said, kind of differentiating the kind of chasing pack behind Bayern from the real contenders and the teams who are doing very well to be in the top four at this stage. And I think we'll obviously go on to talk about Union and Bayern and whether Union fall into one bracket or the other. But yeah, I mean, I would say that kind of Leipzig have kind of been contenders for the most part of the season, and they've showed in this game, as they have done at certain points last season, that they have the quality to beat the good teams in this division really well, and I think that was the kind of performance that I think most people would watch and say, well, that kind of goes to show just how good Leipzig can be. Because it was a match which, they obviously did very well in, and they obviously have a lot of key players. I just talked about Werner there, but there's obviously a game in which Christopher Nkunku didn't start, and he started with Forsberg and Poulsen up front. And with all due respect to both of them, I know they've been very good servants to the club over the years, but they're probably now at stages in their career where they both know they're not first team starters. Yeah. And I actually thought Forsberg did very well in this game. So it was again a show of just how much depth this Leipzig team do have, and the fact that the players who do step in tend to do very well. So, whether, it'll be interesting to see, kind of what happens between now and the rest of the season for Frankfurt, because they're almost certainly going to get knocked out of the Champions League unless something truly remarkable was to happen to Napoli, because they got played off the pitch in every sense in that first leg, and I don't think the second leg in Italy is going to be any better for them. But they're also beginning to kind of peel off in the Bundesliga as well, I think. So, I mean, I guess there's still maybe domestic cup run or something for them, if I'm not mistaken. But maybe it's just a case of them just kind of having to just kind of like really kind of tighten things in that squad, kind of get back to basics and just kind of say, look, between now and the end of the season, we have to really kind of maybe push for that fourth place finish, because it's probably going to come down between them, Union Berlin, and Freiburg for fourth, I think, because I really do think Leipzig will probably kind of push on, and it's going to be a great race to see who can finish in the top four. But for now, it kind of looks like Frankfurt are maybe running out of steam a little bit.
Yeah, I think for them, the top four finish needs to be the priority at this stage, right? I mean, as fun as the Champions League and all that has been, and they're not playing with Koulibaly suspended as well, right, for their return. So I think the best thing for them would be to just essentially capitulate, go out, and then just completely focus on the Bundesliga, have those midweek games off. I think is kind of going to be crucial for them. Leipzig, in the meantime, I mean, we don't know yet if they're going to have midweek off, because they are in a pretty decent position against Man City in that second half. They look really good, right? So they could still have those midweek games. And look, they remain in the chase for the title, I think. Just 4 points off the top two. And you do think that with the squad that they have, yes, they had a couple hiccups now in the second half as well, but still the team that, since Marco Rose has taken over, has collected the most points in the league. And I think Kicker wrote this week that it's a five teams that are fighting for the title. I mean, that's maybe statistically true, and I'm not counting out Union quite yet. But if you look at it realistically from the strengths of the squads, it's really three, isn't it, Stefan? And I think Leipzig are probably in it now.
Yeah, I think we talked about this maybe about a month ago when we were kind of looking at these top teams and how close we were to Bayern, and I kind of said that it'll come down to how these teams do against the other top four contenders, specifically Dortmund and Leipzig.
Next week.
Well, exactly, and I think that's kind of what kind of defines how close these teams are able to stay to Bayern, because obviously Bayern, being Bayern and having the best players in the division, they more often than not, it's all well and good that a team like Union, for example, or I guess Dortmund or Frankfurt or whoever else can keep close to Bayern, but unless they can really kind of chip points off them in the head-to-head, then that's the issue. And I think that's kind of also been the problem for Dortmund since Jurgen Klopp's time at the club, that even though they have had kind of some seasons where they are able to kind of win the games they're expected to win and keep within touch and distance of Bayern, when it has come to these kind of crunch matches like at the Allianz Arena in March or April or something, I was at that game last season, I think. Yeah, well, it was last season. I'm trying to remember how close the title was at that point. I don't think it probably was. Actually, it wasn't, because Bayern went on to win the league that very day. But Dortmund got played off the pitch, and that's the kind of matches that it comes down to. But also, if you're a Dortmund or a Leipzig, the key to these things aren't just getting points off Bayern. It's also making sure when you come up against Union, or you come up against Frankfurt or Freiburg or whoever else, that you make sure you pick up those points. And if we do kind of want to now kind of transition towards that Dortmund game, the interesting thing for them right now is that they're getting a lot of praise for, I think, if I'm not mistaken, they're the only team in the top 5 leagues that have won every game in 2023. 9 from 9
across all competitions too. 9 out of 9,
yes.
Right?
Yeah, but the thing is, and this is, I'm sure Dortmund fans will not appreciate this, but you look at those run of fixtures, and there have been some difficult games in there. Of course there have. They've come up against Leverkusen, they've come up against Freiburg, and of course there's Chelsea in the Champions League, on paper a very difficult opposition. However, more often than not, that kind of run of fixtures has been kind of buffed up with some very poor teams. They've got Augsburg, who, hey, don't get me wrong, I'm a big Augsburg fan, but they're on bottom half the table. Mainz, bottom half the table. Bochum in the Pokal, who actually gave them a good run, but of course, bottom half the table. Werder Bremen, mid-table. Chelsea in the Champions League, who have only won one of their last 15 games. Graham Potter on the verge of getting sacked. They're a nightmare, but also actually ran them quite close, to be honest with you. And in the last 2 games in the Bundesliga have been against Hertha Berlin and Hoffenheim. Now, this Hoffenheim game is quite interesting because Hoffenheim actually caused a few scares, more or less.
Yeah.
And it came across to me as a kind of match in which, again, Gregor Kobel proved that he's worth his weight in gold in this Dortmund team. We've talked about it, I think, last week or the week before, that he might be the best goalkeeper in the division. And once again, proving that, because I think he pulled off some outstanding saves. And I don't know, I think, when it comes down to it over the next kind of between now and the end of the season, it'll be really interesting to see how Leipzig and Dortmund do against the other top 4 teams. And I think that's something that this Dortmund side still have to prove that they can do, and maybe Terzic, maybe Sebastian Kehl, maybe, whoever else at the club will be saying, we're just focusing on trying to get top 4. We're not in the title race, blah, 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 because that's what Dortmund do.
How can you say that at this point?
I know, but they will.
You can't. You can't say that. You can't. I know what you mean. Like, totally. They always do, right? But like, how can you be even on points with Bayern Munich at this stage of the season and say it's not a title race? Like, this is when you, as a club, have to just come straight out and say we're gonna go for it.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. If you look at the next 5 games between now, the next 5 games, which will run all the way to 1st of April, so basically the entirety of March, that run of fixtures, which I'll just run through for you now, because I'm assuming you nor our dear listeners probably have the fixture list in front of them. They played Leipzig at the weekend. They then played Chelsea in the Champions League midweek at Stamford Bridge. They then come home to play Schalke in the Riviera Derby, which more or less you expect them to win, except Schalke have looked good again recently. I mean, they haven't looked like world beaters, but they've been very dogged, which we're going to talk about, because I do want to talk about Schalke before we wrap up the show later on. But yeah, difficult game. Of course, Dortmund tend to do well in those fixtures, but again, still a tricky one. Cologne, okay, fair enough, so-and-so. Then at the end of the month, or rather the start of April, they come up against Bayern. And then actually 4 days after that, they play Leipzig in the Pokal again. So, and then after that, actually, I've just realised they then play Union Berlin. So actually, you could extend that to the next 6 games, and it's a really, really, really tough run of fixtures. And there's only maybe 2 games in there that I would say Dortmund are expected to win. You can maybe say the odds now favour them against Chelsea, but you still really don't know in that regard. So I think that stretch of games will be a real test to see how good this Dortmund team are, because it goes to show whether they are just another Union Berlin and Frankfurt, in the sense that they're picking up the I don't want to say they're picking up the easy points, because there's not any easy points, but I mean in the sense that they're picking up the points they're expected to win. But in these crunch games, they kind of fall away, which is as we've seen from Frankfurt recently, or if they are genuine title contenders and they can say, no, look, we're going to go on and win these difficult games. And then when they come up against Bayern, which is at the Allianz Arena, if they're still within touching distance of them and they can take something from that game, then, Terzic truly has come full circle and showing his critics up. But I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens.
Yeah, I think what makes me feel optimistic about them maybe challenging for the title is that in the past, it wasn't the big fixtures that were a problem for Dortmund, but the ones that they were supposed to win. Like that Hoffenheim game is a perfect example. And I do think a big factor for this is Kobel. We've talked about him quite a bit already in the last few weeks, right? Also, he was the man of the match for me in the Champions League win against Chelsea. But I think that's maybe the difference from them, what they're today and what they were in the past, is that they have a difference maker in goal. And I actually think that that's what always kind of in these crunch matches, that's what made Bayern so successful, is that, for a long period of time, they had the world's best keeper in net. And that makes a huge difference, right? When you look at underlying stats, like the goalkeeper position is the one that you can spend the least amount of money on, but win the most points from signing a good player, right? It's the cheapest investment to make your team better, is what I'm saying. And I think that Kobel, there's a reason why he's becoming increasingly looked at by the world's best teams, because he is a keeper who maybe isn't quite as good with his feet as like a Manuel Neuer, but he has this ability to be an absolute difference maker when it comes to points won, right? And that, I think, could be a huge difference for them this year, that even when it's tied especially in games that they're supposed to win, but then Dortmund thinks, in the past did what Dortmund did, as we always say jokingly in the WhatsApp chat. Hoffenheim is a great example, but then now they have a guy who says like, no, we're not going to Dortmund this. I'm going to make sure that we're going to win this game 1-0.
Yeah.
And I think that is a huge difference for them this year.
I think it's, I've kind of hinted at this in the last couple of weeks, and after this game, I think it only kind of confirms it for me, or not really confirms it, but only kind of pushes me more towards this point of view. But I actually think Gregor Kobel has been more important to Dortmund this season than Jude Bellingham has been. And I know that's a big thing to say because Bellingham is the poster boy, not only for Dortmund, but for the league itself. And, obviously we at Transfermarkt have him as one of the most highly anticipated, most highly valued players in the world. And of course he deserves all that. But in this specific campaign and the performances that Kobel has been putting in, week out, I really don't think there's anyone in this Dortmund team who has been that direct in deciding how a fixture finishes or how the result finishes, because it feels to me like he's pulling off remarkable saves week in, week out that would mean Dortmund drop points here, they drop points there. And, this, I think the old saying is, a great goalkeeper's worth like 10, 15, 20 points a season. And it's so easy to just kind of chalk that up and say, it's such a silly thing to say. But when you have a player like that playing that well, and as you said, Bayern fans will know exactly what that means, because sometimes, some seasons, Manuel Neuer has just stepped up and he has been the main man for Bayern. And you're absolutely right, Gregor Kobel's having that moment for Dortmund right now. And although I think Bellingham is also obviously having a very good season too, I think you could certainly make the case that whereas Dortmund do have other attacking players in the sense of, obviously Sebastian Haller's come in since January, done very well. Julian Brandt has now scored 4 goals in 4 games.
Brandt.
Yeah, exactly. Brandt. Marco Reus has kind of stepped back in and done very well. And of course, they're having a whole array of wide players, and Bayern Gittins and Adeyemi and Gio Reyna, who scored a great goal the weekend but was ruled off. They've got a whole array of attacking players that can score goals just like Jude Bellingham, but they don't have anyone quite like Gregor Kobel, especially with that defence, which I think still looks quite creaky at times. I think Kobel saves more goals than Dortmund score right now, which is why they have scored, or why they have won 9 out of 9 in 2023 so far.
Yeah, he might be the most impactful player in the Bundesliga at the moment.
Do you know what?
Which is...
If you obviously, I'd be interested if our subscribers, because they do let us know their feedback after every show. You guys let me know if you're a Dortmund fan. Let me know if you agree or disagree with that. Or if you're not a Dortmund fan, you still watch them every week. Let me know what you think, because it'd be really interesting to have a discussion about that in the comments below. Because it might just be something that you and I think, and people are like, "No, you're being idiots. You don't know what you're talking about," or they might agree. Who knows?
I get those comments all the time on Twitter, which is why I don't read the Twitter feed anymore. But our subscribers are way too nice to say something like that. No, absolutely. It is an interesting topic in itself, and I mean, we have an extra show this week that will not be about Champions League football, because there is no Champions League football, even though you didn't even know until today.
Yes, which goes to show how busy I've been this weekend, and probably also how much alcohol I've drank this weekend with my wife, that I totally forgot there was no Champions League football.
So we'll come up with something else. But also, obviously, before I completely forget it, there was a RB Leipzig transfer on the weekend, and we are going to discuss it in the transfer show. So, yes, keep that in the back of your heads. Anyways, do you want to do the relegation battle first, or should we, because we're already on the title tangent, let's go to Bayern Union and then maybe to the relegation stuff. What do you think?
Sure. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, let's do Bayern, because, boy, have they shown us off. It took them 45 minutes to win this game. It was interesting too. Julian Nagelsmann said this after the match. And I actually fully agree with it. And I should have thought about this in my analysis pre-game. And I apologize for not thinking about that, but it's been busy. I think the biggest difference in this game was, for me anyhow, that Union Berlin were obviously gassed from playing Ajax midweek. And I actually, I wrote an article for Forbes about this, and my point was in this article that actually the performance against Ajax was a perfect example of how Union Berlin should be playing against Bayern, because they're tactically very similar, right? That really high possession game that Ajax have. They had 73% possession. The fact that Union Berlin were very clinical with the chances. Essentially, Ajax did win the XG battle quite easily, but Union just converted the 3 chances that they had and went through. What I didn't consider in my analysis is that playing like that twice in 1 week for a team like Union Berlin is just too much, Stefan. And that's where my analysis fell short. And for anyone who read that Forbes article, I apologize. I should have thought about that. Because Nagelsmann was actually quick to point that out. He said in his post-match reaction, I don't want to misquote him, so I'm just going to paraphrase it, that essentially Bayern Munich were able to beat Union Berlin quickly because they didn't have the legs to do what they usually do because of the midweek game against Ajax.
No, I completely agree. And I think the other thing to add to that with regards to Union is that I was looking at their pass maps after the game, and the most frequent pass was from the goalkeeper up to Sibichu at the up front, which just goes to show just how direct Union were having to be, which I guess is fine if you're trying to play a very counter-attacking style, which Union do tend to do at times, but it was very simplistic. It was very reductive. It was very kind of as if they were they just simply weren't even, they didn't have the coherence or the kind of mental aptitude to try and pass their way around Bayern. And I think you're absolutely spot on in the sense that it was a very fatigued performance from Union. And that showed up in just about every stat. They had some moments in the second half. If I'm not mistaken, I think it was maybe Becker who came very close to maybe pulling it back when it was 3-0. But and then maybe at that point in the second half, maybe Bayern start to kind of shake a little bit. But no, I thought it was a complete performance from Bayern. And the thing that really stood out to me, 2 things that stood out to me, and it's not really kind of groundbreaking or hot takes because they were both quite literally on the score sheet to an extent, in the sense that I thought the 2 Bayern players who were both outstanding were Kingsley Coman and Thomas Müller. And I think it's been really interesting, obviously Coman, everyone knows is a big player for Bayern, but Nagelsmann has kind of been quite selective in how he uses him this season. He obviously feels a degree that he has to kind of rotate him between Sané and Gnabry to an extent. But in this performance, he was untouchable, and obviously against PSG very recently, he was the exact same. And he's just offered a directness and a usefulness that I think has kind of been missing from Sané and Gnabry's game for much of the season, actually. And when he's on form like that, he's just tremendous. And that first goal for Choupo-Moting was just almost out of the Robert Lewandowski playbook, wasn't it? And there must have just been a collective gasp of relief when the Bayern fans saw, a simple cross into the box and a big number 9 just heading it home, because we've talked about how Bayern have tried to kind of overplay at times and how they struggled to break teams down. And once again, Choupo-Moting steps up there. So Coman, did a tremendously great job there. And of course, he then scored 9 minutes after that. But the other thing that I think really stood out to me is that this was possibly Thomas Müller's best performance of the season. I mean, maybe he's played better and nothing really comes to mind for me at the moment. But, I made a video actually just at the turn of the year, kind of looking at his stats in the first half of the season, and they really had plummeted because, as I theorized, he was missing a big kind of number. He obviously had a strike partner, Robert Lewandowski, who, they had such a great, coherent partnership for so many years. And as soon as you kind of pluck Lewandowski from that system, it makes sense that Thomas Müller was obviously going to struggle to kind of adapt. You obviously then throw in the fact he was struggling with injuries, he didn't look fit, and I think perhaps, obviously 2 moments of magic from Müller which I thought were outstanding. One, that kind of over the head pass for Coman to set up the second goal was just kind of peak Müller, in the sense that he's such an outstanding playmaker at the best of times and allows players to play off him. But also that's his kind of run for the third goal, which, at the end of the day, we're kind of talking about a player here who's now 33 years old, and he's bursting a gut to get to the byline there to swing a ball back from Musiala, and I think that more than anything else must be the most kind of encouraging thing for Bayern fans who were kind of hoping and wondering if the old Muller was going to return, and that suggested to me that he still has plenty of gas in the tank, and if you will, in the sense that he's capable of kind of really hitting the ground running, or really getting to that byline, beating the defender, and swinging the ball back from Musiala, and really putting it on a plate for him, because that's going to be such a big thing for Bayern going into this, or for the remainder of the season, if he is fully fit, because I feel like he's been such a big miss for them. And yeah, so I think you couple some really good performances from Bayern with a really exhausting one from Union Berlin, and you're obviously going to get this result. I think I did kind of predict a Bayern win, if I'm not mistaken, in the preview, because
I think you did.
Because as good as Union have been this season, they've built this successful campaign off the bedrock that is that home form and how well they play in front of their own fans. I think going into this fixture, if you looked at their away performances, they're maybe only the 5th or 6th best in the season. So, I think it's I don't think it's really alarm bells for Union Berlin. I don't think any Union fans are going to be upset that they didn't win at the Allianz Arena, and I certainly don't think it means that the bubble has burst or anything like that. I just think they've been quite tepid away from home for some time now. Bayern kind of look back to their best, and of course Union are kind of fighting on multiple fronts right now with the European football, so they have to just kind of take it as they go.
I think this is going to be a few thoughts here. It's going to be an interesting storyline that what's going to happen if the Bundesliga keeps doing well in Europe, because those first few Champions League results were very encouraging, right, from all three sides. 3 out of the 4 have a good chance of advancing, which then of course comes with its own challenges. I think the Bundesliga will pray that Bayern advance, because I think that will mean that for the rest of the league there's more of a chance to beat them, because they will have to fight on an additional front. Then of course the teams in the Europa League all advanced, and Freiburg obviously had a bye in that latest round, right? They face Juventus, but Union have an easy opponent, Leverkusen have an easy opponent. There's a good chance that you have teams going deep in the European competition. And I think that's going to be interesting to see how that's going to give advantage to some sides and disadvantages to other. I'm glad you're bringing up Kingsley Coman, because this, because I've had this planned, and then last week I opted to write the 1860 newsletter, which, by the way, I saw all the comments. They were wonderful. Thank you so much. I just haven't had the time to respond yet. But my newsletter this week is actually on Kingsley Coman, and how he's kind of been reinvented a little bit by Nagelsmann. And I think that you saw the PSG game was a great example of that, I thought. But I also thought this game against Union was another good example. He's becoming increasingly more of like a two-way player who's defensively extremely important, but also still very effective in the attack. And that makes him such a valuable commodity. And it's often kind of a little bit ignored or passed over because he's such a quiet character. But yeah, so I'm going to do my newsletter about that, because I think his numbers are fascinating and some of the things that have been said. My final thought on Thomas Müller. I wonder with his numbers, the way that they're kind of going up and down at the moment. There was an interesting moment after the game when I was in Munich against Bochum, where he talked to us in the mixed zone, and he was actually going straight to the physio after the game, right? He had a physio appointment. So it was actually surprising that he stopped at all. No wallet trick this time around. Anyone who was wondering, the wallet trick is Müller does like to hold his wallet to his to his ear, pretending it's a phone so he doesn't have to talk to us. It was actually a real phone this time, and he did stop nonetheless. But he did say that he kind of hinted that he's been struggling with a lot of small injuries this year, which, of course, if you know Thomas Müller's injury history, it's pretty much non-existent, right? Up until pretty much this year. And I think he's getting to a point now where he just has to invest a lot more in his body. And I think that maybe it's been an adjustment for him. especially in the first half of the year. And I wonder if now, there was some interesting Zlatan Ibrahimovic quotes that came out, right? 41, he's still going. I wonder that now that Thomas Müller is entering a stage of his career where he actually has to take a bit more care of his body, and if he was this year at a time where he had to adjust a little bit more to that, like, I'm not saying he didn't work in his private time. He obviously did, but now he has to put in more hours at the physio, right? And he has to put in extra shifts to get his body ready. And I wonder if at the first half of the season we saw Thomas Müller adjusting to that new reality, Stefan.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a kind of sad fact of life, but I guess when players do get to that age, when they do have a bad run of 5 or 6 months, it seems harsh, but it's also fair to say, well, is this just a natural decline that everybody goes through, or is this just another kind of blip in their career? And it would be great for Müller and for German football if it was just a blip and he is able to bounce back, because he is such a useful player. So you'd think that he would have a degree of longevity that maybe would escape players that are far more direct and maybe rely far more on acceleration and pace, for example. But yeah, again, we'll just have to kind of wait and see. I did kind of dig into his numbers, and I wouldn't go so far as to say it's kind of black and white in terms of, going from bad to good or whatever, vice versa. It still has a long way to go, I think, before he's back to being the kind of really consistent, week in, week out performer for Bayern. I think Bayern fans probably know that, but it could not be coming at a better time this season for them because, they're still not exactly out of the woods in terms of the performances. No. Obviously this week was tremendous, but as I kind of talked about on the reaction pod to the PSG game, I wasn't entirely convinced by it, and I still think the second leg, when it does come, will be very, very difficult. So it's good that these players are coming back and that Bayern are kind of picking up points, but they're still in the same kind of position as the likes of Dortmund and Leipzig, in the sense that they now have tricky European games, but unlike maybe most seasons in the Bundesliga, they also have to keep another eye on the domestic league because, they probably like to think that by the time the quarterfinals or the semi-finals of the Champions League come around, they've already wrapped up the title. And if that's not the case, then it makes what is usually a kind of routine end to the Bundesliga season far more difficult for them.
They have another spell in the Bundesliga and then where things are going to go badly. And I think that is what everyone else kind of knows too. We just chatted about Dortmund and the key games that they all have. I think that the competition, Bayern's competition, could stumble and it will still be an open title race because you just know that there's another stretch coming where they're all of a sudden going to draw like 3 games.
Yeah, exactly.
They still have those performances in them. So, it remains exciting. I mean, that's great. This is what we want. Everyone wants this. We want the Bundesliga to do well internationally, and it looks like they are. Of course, we have to wait how the second legs pan out, and we want the Bundesliga to be exciting. And we might actually be able to get both this year, which is great, which is really great. Look, it's also exciting at the other end of the table, Stefan, because you wrote a great newsletter about Schalke last week. Really interesting. Schalke win against Stuttgart. And it's now between 14th and 18th, just 4 points in the relegation battle. This is going to be very interesting. I want to let you take it away from here because obviously you wrote a bit about Schalke and you predicted this result.
Yeah, I got one right, I guess. It's say about broken clock and all that jazz. No, I thought this was a great game, to be honest with you. You never really expect these bottom of the table games to go well, but it was actually a very entertaining match. Some great goals in it, particularly Schalke's second goal, which was you would not have thought they were a team who'd gone 4 games without scoring if you'd watched the way that Marius Bulters just kind of back-heeled the ball into the back of the net, it's a goal that would have made Neymar blush. So it was a great game in that sense, and it obviously was just kind of dripping with narratives and importance, and you could kind of even just watch the game on telly. You could kind of feel the tension and the kind of drama from the Veltins Arena, which is just such an outstanding stadium, and it breaks my heart to see Schalke in this position, and to an extent, because they are such a big club, and it goes beyond really who you support. Now, look, of course, if you're a Dortmund fan, I'm sure you're not exactly worrying for them, but if you're not and you're neutral, it's just like it's like watching, you know, one of the biggest clubs in any division, and it's always fun when you see big teams falter, but when you see them falter for so long, you begin to really appreciate that they have so many fans who show up every week to watch them, and you're like, it's just not nice seeing that many people upset. It's obviously good to see Schalke win, in my opinion, and I think it was a game in which, you know, they obviously pulled ahead with 2 great goals at the start, and I think what ultimately kind of won it for Schalke was the sense that they were able to kind of fall back on that really impressive kind of defensive fortitude that they've managed to really kind of build. And that was kind of what my newsletter was about last week, in the sense that, you know, they hadn't conceded a goal in 4 games, and, you know, obviously they were getting quite worked up about the fact that they weren't scoring goals, but also I thought, well, that defensive kind of stability will kind of put them in good stead towards the end of the season. And Stuttgart really threw everything, including the kitchen sink, at them in the second half. And although it kind of came down to, like, you know, Borna Sosa hitting a really kind of speculative shot that somehow managed to go through Farman's legs, which is a real shame because he pulled off some outstanding saves in this game. But it felt to me like in that second half they were able to kind of really bunker down and see off a decent late charge from Stuttgart. And like my newsletter is kind of on this game and how it reflects on Stuttgart. And I think it's interesting how when teams meet at this stage of the season and how close they are in the league, and how it's almost like the narratives around the clubs, they almost like they kind of swap narratives in a sense, because it's very easy to see Schalke now in the ascendancy and Stuttgart in the descendancy, you know. And like, I'm not going to obviously just recite my entire newsletter because it's not really specifically about the here and now in terms of the form. There's some other aspects to it, but some of the kind of stats for Stuttgart that stood out to me, which I'm happy to recite here, and which are quite concerning since Labadia came in, are really troubling. I'll just kind of read them out to you here. That in Labadia's first 5 games in charge of the club, he's only managed to pick up on average 0.4 points per game. Now on Transfermarkt, we have a manager impact table, which you can go on. So you can go to the Bundesliga page, and then one of the drop-down menus that shows you there, which is the worst manager impact this season. And it's only 1/3 of what his predecessor, Michael Wimmer, was picking up in his final 5 games before he got replaced. So it goes to show that just kind of, you know, like how bad the start was. And since then, so since Labadia came in as Stuttgart head coach, only one club, which is Hoffenheim, have picked up fewer points than Stuttgart. And, you know, watching this game as well today, or not today, when I watched this game, it made me think today as I was writing this newsletter that, you know, we've spent all season talking about how much trouble Schalke are in, and I think that's kind of maybe overshadowed the fact that Stuttgart are also in a lot of trouble. But where a club like Schalke, you know, maybe have, in my opinion, they have a head coach who's been there before, who has a very clear, you know, tactical outlook on life. I'm obviously talking about Thomas Rice here, who I thought did a very good job at Bochum in making them very difficult to beat. And as I wrote my newsletter last week, you know, in the sense that he's now kind of doing that with Schalke, and that's how they picked up 4 draws in the last 4 games. That's how they managed to beat Stuttgart. And then, as I pointed out in the newsletter, how they've now got a really good run of games now where they're playing bottom half teams and they can really start picking up a lot of points. Whereas they have that kind of bedrock and that strong foundation to work on between now and end of the season, I feel like Stuttgart are just kind of in free fall, you know. And Bruno Labbadia after the game was just kind of all over the place, and he was kind of talking about how he wanted the club to do one thing but they did the other. He said they didn't have courage. He complained that he has now, I didn't really complain, but he kept making the point that he has the youngest team in the league, which just kind of makes,
in fairness,
yeah, he does. But then but then that's kind of like, well, then what? And then again, I'm trying to bite my tongue here because this is kind of what my newsletter is about. I don't want to repeat it, but it makes you kind of think, well, what are Stuttgart doing? What's the point having the youngest team in the league if it's going to get relegated? There's no point in getting applause for scouting exciting young players if at the end of the day they can't do their job, which is to win enough games to avoid relegation. It doesn't matter if you're 19 or 34. If you get relegated, you're still useless.
Can I say something about that? Because you're completely right. And it's actually really frustrating then if you're a club that has gone out and bought all this young talent and then you hire a coach who complains about the young players and kind of throws them under the bus. That's a really bad look. And we're in the year 2023 and young players is the future, and the sport is getting increasingly younger in terms of what you field and then you can't, and then this is kind of on the club. It's not just on Labadia, but they knew what they were getting.
Yeah, it's absolutely on the club, and that's the entire point that we're kind of making here. That what are Stuttgart up to? Because we talked about this when they hired Labadia in the first place. What was the point? Why? Where's the strategy behind that? Where's the thinking behind that? Does Labadia have a long and proven track record in the Bundesliga? Not really. He's obviously got experience in inverted commas because he's coached a lot of games. Whether he's actually, taken a number of clubs to a great degree of success, especially in recent years, is certainly up for debate, in my opinion. And it's kind of, at the end of the day, you kind of reap what you sow. And I think Schalke have kind of, and by no means am I saying Schalke are a well-run club and deserve a lot of praise, because, even Schalke fans will say, they're sick to the back teeth of the people who do run the club. But at the very least, they were able to get a head coach in who knew what he was doing, and they're now seeing the benefits of that. And then I just think this game was so good in the sense that it showed the contrast between those two systems. Yeah. So anyway, if you want to know more, go read my newsletter.
Just some final thoughts here before we wrap up the show. The relegation battle, of course, remains incredibly interesting. And I just wonder now that we can, if we're going to see Schalke pull out of it. I know they're still last. I know that there's 3 points behind, I think 3 or 4 teams right in front of them, right?
Yeah.
But that's now 4 games in a row that they have collected points. And you don't necessarily stay in the league by just winning. You literally just need to collect points every weekend, right? And you almost wonder now that if they just keep going at this pace, you could see them conceivably jump over 2 or 3 teams in front of them.
Yeah.
And that is worrying for someone like Hoffenheim or Stuttgart or maybe even, Augsburg, who are further up. But
yeah. Well, if you want to base it on form, in the last 5 games, Schalke are ninth in the table.
Yeah.
Which says a lot.
And I mean, honestly, I'd be quite honest with you. You can hate or like Schalke. I always think that the teams that you want, these big teams in the league. The Bundesliga is a better league with Werder Bremen and Schalke, right?
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, in fairness, they are with Stuttgart too, but that's a completely different conversation. But, those big teams need to stay in the league. And I hope that Schalke stays in the league somehow, because if they pull this off somehow, they will be in a much better situation next year, because then you get more television revenue, right? You get better advertising revenue. You can sort of build on that performance. It's going to take them, if they manage to stay in the league, it's going to take them at least another 2 or 3 years of this. Relegation battles, right? Every year until they're completely out of the woods. That's how big the damage is. But I think if they pull this off, they will actually find themselves in all of a sudden a much better place in terms of where the club is. Because it makes everything easier, doesn't it? If you look at Werder Bremen, and they're pretty much secure of staying in the league now. And we talked about this last week about the commercial revenue that's all of a sudden coming in, right? Because there is that security. So it'd be a really, really great thing if they can sort of pull that off. And then if we maybe get a team like Hamburg or Kaiserslautern back as well next year, I think the league will be a better place for it. Without a doubt.
Well, there we go. We've if Dortmund fans didn't already hate us, they'll hate us now that we both eulogized about how much we love Schalke.
I had this in one of my comments under the 1860 article. and I talk to my friends in Munich all the time because I have lots of Bayern Munich fans, I have lots of 1860 fans. And my Bayern Munich friends are always like, when are you guys getting your stuff? Well, do you use the let's be French here. Get the shit together, right? Pardon my French. Because we want our Munich derby back, right? You want those games are so meaningful for people. The Munich derby used to be two dates in the calendar that everyone circled. It was a really important date, and yes, Dortmund fans probably love making fun of Schalke, but at the end of the day, that Revier derby date is so very important for so many people. And you can say the same about the people in Hamburg and people in Berlin and, everyone involved. Like, those derby dates are special. So, it's great to make fun of your opponent, but in the end of the day, you still want to play them.
No, of course. No, I think it's very important. I completely agree. I've got no qualms about supporting Schalke to avoid relegation. Of course, Stuttgart are just as big a club to an extent, and it'd be horrible to see them go down. But it'll be interesting. I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens.
Yeah, exactly. But that wraps it up. As always, the show is brought to you by Bet Online. I am mostly at home this upcoming week, so we should be on a pretty regular schedule. The transfer show, we have a Leipzig transfer to discuss, maybe a little bit more news about Marco Reus's future as well, and some other stuff. We still have to think about another midweek show, Stefan, but I'm sure the two of us will come up with something exciting. You already said new newsletters on Stuttgart, so if you're interested in reading that, sign up for the Substack. I can highly recommend that. There's a lot of really cool content on there that is not available for free. I'm sorry. But and then my newsletter is about Kingsley Coman. So anything else you want to add, Stefan, before we wrap this up?
No, I think you got most of it there. Yeah, just as always, to thank you to all the subscribers who do listen, and even just the people who listen to the show every week. It's a big thank you. I know we kind of go on about subscribers a lot, but if you don't subscribe, if you can't subscribe, that's totally fine. We still love that you guys listen, and it's a big thank you. So as always, thanks, and we'll see. If you don't subscribe, I guess we'll see you on Friday.
Yep, back with the preview show. Until then, auf Wiedersehen.
In Sicht.
Thank you for listening to Believe. You can show support to your host by subscribing to the show and giving us a 5-star rating on your preferred platform. Check us out at Believe.com and search for BLEAV on YouTube.